A rainy Tuesday evening in the early 1960s, 7 o'clock sharp. Inside Harlem's legendary Cotton Club, the air wasn't just thick with the scent of aged whiskey and expensive perfume. It hummed with something far more potent: anticipation. Every hushed conversation, every clink of ice in a glass seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a silent signal, a shift in the invisible current that governed this opulent, dimly lit room. The patrons, a careful mix of local dignitaries, jazz aficionados, and figures whose power was felt more than seen, all understood one thing: tonight was not just another night out. At table 7, the very heart of the room, sat Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, Harlem's godfather. His posture, as always, was regal, his gaze unreadable, a single unlit cigar resting beside a crystal glass of cognac. It was a silent harbinger, a symbol of a decision already made, a judgment waiting to be delivered. Beside him, an elegant older woman, Madame Evangeline Eve Dubois, sipped her drink with an almost imperceptible grace. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, missed nothing. Her presence radiated an authority that commanded respect even from Bumpy's most hardened enforcers, a quiet power that spoke volumes without a single word. This wasn't merely dinner, it was a public theater of power, a stage set for an unforgettable moment in Harlem's history. Consider the odds, the sheer audacity. How does a man betray a legend like Bumpy Johnson not once, not twice, but 3 times, survive 3 all-out underworld wars, and still walk into the Cotton Club believing he holds the upper hand? That's the impossible question hanging in the smoky air, a riddle whispered in the shadows of Sugar Hill for decades. Because tonight, Silas, the serpent thorn, the cunning turncoat whose name was synonymous with treachery, was about to discover that his fate wouldn't be sealed by a bullet in an alley, but by a ghost from the past, waiting patiently at that very table. A detail so profound, so devastatingly simple, that history books often forget to write it down. Silas Thorne had a reputation for slithering out of trouble, a knack for self-preservation that bordered on the supernatural. He'd navigated the treacherous currents of Harlem's underworld, shifting loyalties like a con artist shuffles cards, always landing on his feet. Each time, Bumpy Johnson had vowed retribution. Each time, Silas had slipped away, leaving behind a trail of broken trust and simmering resentment. 3 wars, 3 betrayals, and yet here he was, summoned to the very den of the lion he'd repeatedly poked. What kind of man could inspire such a deadly game of cat and mouse, and what kind of fool would play it for so long? The whispers around the room were almost as thick as the tension. Everyone knew Bumpy Johnson. His name was a benchmark for power, strategy, and an unwavering, almost sacred code of loyalty. To cross Bumpy was to invite a slow, inevitable reckoning. To cross him 3 times and still breathe, that was practically a myth, a legend in itself. And yet, the myth was about to walk through those doors. The air crackled with anticipation, a silent countdown to a confrontation that promised to redefine everything these people thought they knew about power and justice in Harlem. The jazz band played a smooth, low tune, a deceptive melody that did little to calm the nerves. Every note felt like a heartbeat, counting down to the inevitable. The stakes were monumental, not just for Silas, but for Bumpy himself. His reputation, his authority, the very fabric of his unwritten law in Harlem rested on this night. To allow a 3-time traitor to walk away yet again would chip away at the foundation of his empire. But to end it with a simple act of violence, that was too crude, too common for a man like Bumpy Johnson. He operated on a different plane, a master strategist who understood that true power wasn't about the loudest bang, but the most profound silence. He knew that some lessons had to be taught with an impact that echoed for generations. A judgment delivered not with a gun, but with an unforgettable, inescapable truth. The Cotton Club, on this particular Tuesday, wasn't just a place to see and be seen. It was a courtroom, a stage, and a tomb all rolled into one. The lighting, usually so flattering, now felt like a spotlight, illuminating every subtle shift in expression, every nervous twitch. The clinking of silverware, usually a pleasant background hum, now sounded like tiny hammers, tapping out the seconds. Every eye in the room, discreetly or overtly, drifted back to Table 7, to Bumpy Johnson and Madame Dubois, trying to decipher the unsaid, to read the judgment in their still faces. What did Bumpy have planned? And who was this woman whose presence seemed to amplify the tension with every quiet breath she took? Her elegance was a stark contrast to the brutal realities of the world outside, yet her stillness suggested a deeper, more formidable strength. This meeting wasn't about a simple settlement or a forced truce. This was about a code, a line drawn in the Harlem asphalt that Silas Thorne had repeatedly stomped across. It was about loyalty, betrayal, and the kind of justice that resonated deeper than any bullet, the kind of justice that burned away a man's pride long before it touched his flesh, the kind of judgment that left a scar on the soul, not just the body. The question wasn't if Silas would face his reckoning, but how. And more importantly, who would be the one to deliver it? Because the true architect of his downfall, the final, inescapable pronouncement, wasn't Bumpy Johnson himself. It was someone far more unexpected, someone whose very presence at Table 7 was a silent, devastating pronouncement of judgment. To truly grasp what unfolded that night, to understand the meticulous, almost artistic nature of Bumpy Johnson's final move, we need to peel back the layers of a legend. We need to understand the kind of man Bumpy Johnson truly was, the unwritten rules that governed his world, and the precise moment when a three-time traitor ran out of luck and out of road. Harlem in the early 1960s wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a kingdom, and Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was its undisputed king. But unlike other rulers of the underworld, Bumpy didn't govern through brute force alone. His crown was forged from intellect, a meticulous understanding of power dynamics, and a code that, while brutal, demanded a strange kind of respect. He wasn't just a gangster. He was a strategic mastermind, a chess player whose board stretched from the bustling streets of Sugar Hill to the back alleys of the numbers game. He saw 5 moves ahead, always. And what he saw, few others even dared to imagine. His legend didn't start in a flash of gunfire. It began with quiet observation, with shrewd alliances, and with an unshakable resolve to protect his community, even if it meant ruling it with an iron fist. Bumpy understood the pulse of Harlem, its dreams, its struggles. He was the man who could negotiate with the Italian mobsters from downtown, standing firm, never ceding an inch of his territory or his people's dignity. He built an empire not just on fear, but on a peculiar blend of loyalty and a fierce, almost paternal protectiveness. His word was currency, more valuable than any dollar bill in the pockets of his lieutenants. Break that word, betray that trust, and the consequences were not just swift, they were absolute. Or so everyone believed. This reputation, this ironclad code, was the very bedrock of his power. It was what kept Harlem stable, what kept the peace, and what made Bumpy Johnson, Bumpy Johnson. This is where Silas the Serpent Thorne slithered into the picture. Silas wasn't born into power. He was a climber, a man who learned to mimic the movements of those above him. Bumpy saw something in Silas, a sharp mind, a hunger that could be molded into loyalty. He took Silas under his wing, taught him the intricacies of the numbers racket, the delicate dance of street politics, the unspoken rules that kept the peace, and the ironclad ones that demanded allegiance. Silas was given a seat at Bumpy's table, a chance to earn respect, a share of the empire. He rose quickly, a trusted lieutenant, a man whispered to be Bumpy's right hand. He wore expensive suits, drove a Cadillac, and walked with a swagger that spoke of proximity to power. But beneath that veneer of loyalty, a different kind of ambition coiled, one that saw opportunities where others saw unbreakable bonds. The first tremor hit in the spring of 1961. Harlem was a gold mine, particularly the numbers game, a daily lottery that fueled dreams and paid for groceries. Bumpy had a meticulously organized system, a network of runners and collectors, a steady stream of cash flowing through the neighborhood. But a new player, an ambitious crew from the Bronx, started encroaching, trying to carve out their own piece. It was a classic turf war, a chess match where every block was a square and every runner a pawn. Bumpy moved swiftly, consolidating his forces, preparing for a decisive counterstrike. He trusted Silas with a critical piece of that strategy, securing the loyalty of key runners in the Eastern District, routes that generated tens of thousands of dollars a week, vital for the entire operation. The stakes were not just money. They were the stability of Bumpy's meticulously built financial machine and his reputation as the ultimate protector. What Bumpy didn't know, what no one truly suspected, was that Silas had already been playing both sides. For weeks, maybe months, Silas had been siphoning off funds, whispering promises to the Bronx crew, painting Bumpy as a relic, a man too old for the new game. He'd met them in secret, in dimly lit diners in Queens, exchanging information for promises of a bigger cut. When Bumpy made his move, those key runners Silas was supposed to secure suddenly vanished, or worse, openly defied Bumpy's orders, switching allegiance to the Bronx. The Eastern District, a vital artery of Bumpy's operation, bled dry. The betrayal cost Bumpy hundreds of thousands of dollars, plunged Harlem into a brutal, weeks-long skirmish, and threatened to unravel his entire network. The damage was undeniable, the treachery palpable. It wasn't just a financial hit, it was a wound to the very honor system Bumpy had so carefully cultivated. Bumpy's fury was legendary, a quiet storm that left devastation in its wake. Every man in his organization expected Silas to disappear, to be found in a shallow grave somewhere upstate, or simply never seen again. The whispers in the back rooms of the Cotton Club were all about how swift and brutal the retribution would be. But here's the twist, the detail that confounded everyone. Silas, the serpent, Thorne survived. He didn't just survive, he walked away. When Bumpy's enforcers came for him, Silas had vanished, leaving behind a trail of carefully planted misinformation, a web of alibis that, while flimsy, prevented direct, undeniable proof of his complicity. He'd exploited loopholes, played on the ambiguities of street code, and leveraged minor debts owed to him by others to create just enough doubt. There was no smoking gun, no irrefutable witness willing to testify against him. Not yet, anyway. Silas, for his part, vanished from Harlem for a few months, only to reappear in a neighboring borough, seemingly untouched, seemingly unbound. Many whispered that Bumpy had gone soft, that his grip was weakening. How could the godfather of Harlem allow such a blatant act of treason to go unpunished? Not just unpunished, but unavenged. Was it a sign of weakness, a reluctance to shed blood that would further destabilize the streets? Or was it something far more calculated? What very few understood was that Bumpy Johnson rarely acted on raw emotion. His justice wasn't about immediate, messy retribution. It was about the perfect, undeniable lesson, delivered at the precise moment it would have maximum impact. It was about making an example that resonated for decades. And sometimes the most devastating move on the chessboard isn't to capture a piece immediately, but to let it wander, to let it believe it's free, only to corner it when all escape routes are sealed, when its arrogance has fully blossomed. Silas, for all his cunning, had just survived his first war against Bumpy Johnson. He thought he was free. He thought he was clever. He had no idea he was simply being moved into position, a pawn in a game far larger and more patient than he could ever comprehend. The darkness that followed Silas's perceived escape was not one of oblivion, but of a careful, calculated repositioning. He vanished from Harlem, only to resurface months later, a ghost slipping through the city's cracks, ready for his next move. This time, his ambition led him not to Bumpy's immediate territory, but to the lucrative drug routes snaking through Washington Heights, a move designed to cut off Bumpy's supply lines and starve his operation of vital cash flow. It was a brazen play, backed by whispers of alliances with a nascent crew from Queens, eager to make a name for themselves. Bumpy Johnson, the undisputed godfather of Harlem, watched. He heard the intelligence, saw the numbers shift, felt the ripple of disrespect spread through his network, yet he did not strike with the immediate brutal force everyone expected. Instead, he made subtle adjustments. He rerouted his own supply. He tightened his grip on his existing distribution. He allowed Silas to overextend, to believe his cleverness was truly outsmarting the lion. The streets buzzed with confusion. "Why isn't Bumpy moving?" they'd ask in hushed tones over cups of coffee at the corner diner. "Has he lost his edge?" The narrative of Silas, the serpent thorn, the man who could betray Bumpy Johnson and live, began to take root. This second war wasn't fought with bullets and bloodshed in the open, but with economic pressure and psychological warfare, a slow burn that drained Bumpy's coffers while building Silas's false confidence. Silas, emboldened, even managed to divert a shipment of high-grade narcotics, a hit that cost Bumpy a cool $75,000 in a single night. This was a substantial sum in the early 1960s, enough to fund a small army. But instead of retaliating, Bumpy simply moved his pieces on the board, securing new connections, tightening his internal security. He absorbed the blow, a chess master sacrificing a pawn to expose a greater weakness. Silas, seeing no direct reprisal, believed he'd won. He believed Bumpy was losing his touch. He thought he was untouchable. Then came the third war, even more audacious, even more personal. Silas, having solidified his new connections, attempted to flip a key lieutenant within Bumpy's organization, a man named Leon, who managed a significant portion of the numbers racket in Sugar Hill. The offer was simple: betray Bumpy, take a cut of the new, expanded territory, and live like a king. Silas even offered a direct line to a corrupt police captain, promising immunity from harassment. This wasn't just about money. It was about tearing Bumpy's empire from the inside out, a direct challenge to his authority and the unwritten code of loyalty that held Harlem together. Leon, a man of quiet loyalty, brought the offer directly to Bumpy at his apartment on St. Nicholas Avenue on a crisp Tuesday morning in November, just after 7 a.m. Bumpy listened without interruption, his eyes unblinking. He simply nodded, thanked Leon, and told him to accept the offer. The streets were already humming with the news, the rumors of Bumpy's supposed weakness growing louder. "They say Bumpy let him live for a reason," some whispered, a desperate attempt to explain the inexplicable. Others simply shook their heads, convinced Bumpy was finally fading. Nobody understood why Silas kept getting a pass. It was a calculated risk, a deliberate erosion of trust that Bumpy allowed to fester, all part of a plan no one, not even his closest associates, could possibly fathom. Silas, meanwhile, was basking in his perceived glory. He'd survived 3 direct confrontations, 3 attempts to dethrone the king, and emerged not only unscathed, but seemingly stronger. He even boasted openly in smoky backrooms, claiming Bumpy was old news, a relic. His arrogance grew with each passing month. He truly believed he was the new power in Harlem, that he had broken Bumpy Johnson. He was out of Harlem for years, building his own small empire in Philadelphia, convinced he'd escaped Bumpy's shadow for good. But then the summons came, a discreet message, hand-delivered by a neutral party on a cool evening in early spring. Bumpy Johnson wanted to talk, a peace talk, the messenger called it, a final settlement regarding old debts and new territories. The location, the Cotton Club, Harlem's historic jewel, now a high-end restaurant and jazz club, a neutral ground where deals were often made and fates were sealed. Silas, now backed by a new, ambitious crew from South Philly, saw this as his moment of ultimate triumph. He would walk in, negotiate his terms, and officially claim his place as a force to be reckoned with, perhaps even demanding a piece of Bumpy's remaining empire. On that fateful rainy Tuesday evening in the early 1960s, Silas, the Serpent Thorn, strode into the Cotton Club with a swagger that spoke of false bravado and genuine arrogance. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and simmering tension. The low hum of a jazz trio played in the background, a melancholic counterpoint to the drama unfolding. Every head in the room, from the hushed couples at their tables to the watchful eyes of Bumpy's men, turned to follow Silas as he made his way to table 7. He spotted Bumpy, seated alone, a half-empty glass of amber liquid before him, his gaze fixed on the entrance. Silas's smirk widened. He had Bumpy. He had won. He approached the table, pulling out the empty chair opposite Bumpy with an exaggerated flourish. "Bumpy," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's been a long time. I trust you're ready to discuss terms." He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, leaning back, crossing his arms, a picture of smug self-assurance. He was ready to dictate, to demand. He was ready to make Bumpy pay. Then Bumpy Johnson, without a word, slowly lifted his hand, not to strike, not to signal his men, but to gesture to the empty chair beside him. Silas's eyes followed Bumpy's movement, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He hadn't noticed. No one had. The chair had been angled subtly, partially obscured by the table's edge, and then, with a deliberate, almost painfully slow motion, Madame Evangeline Eve Dubois turned her head. Her eyes, sharp as obsidian, locked onto Silas. The blood drained from Silas's face so fast he felt a sudden dizzying chill. The smirk vanished, replaced by a ghastly pallor. His jaw went slack. The air in the opulent club seemed to thicken, the jazz music suddenly sounding like a death knell. Madame Dubois. Not just a powerful numbers queen, not just a figure from Bumpy's past. She was a force of nature, a woman whose influence ran deeper than any man's, whose memory was as long as the Harlem River itself. Her presence wasn't just a surprise. It was an impossible result, a twist of fate Silas could never have anticipated. He had survived 3 wars against Bumpy, but he had forgotten the one debt that truly mattered. Madame Dubois, her voice as smooth and cool as aged whiskey, broke the silence. She didn't raise her voice, but every word resonated with an authority that silenced the entire room. She spoke not of drug routes or numbers rackets, but of a different kind of betrayal. She detailed, with chilling precision, how Silas, years ago, had orchestrated the downfall of a small charitable orphanage in Harlem, a place funded by the community, by the very people Bumpy and Eve swore to protect. He hadn't just stolen funds, he had manipulated records, leveraged corrupt officials, and ultimately forced its closure, leaving dozens of children without a home, all to secure a minor real estate deal that benefited his burgeoning criminal enterprise. It was a betrayal so profound, so utterly devoid of humanity, that it went beyond the codes of the underworld. It was a violation of the very soul of Harlem, a direct assault on its most vulnerable. Silas had used a network of shell corporations and backroom deals, believing his tracks were covered, but Madame Dubois, with her unparalleled reach and meticulous records, had unraveled every single thread. She laid out dates, names, specific dollar amounts, all delivered with an unyielding calm that made his every excuse meaningless. The humiliation was absolute, public, and inescapable. Every influential figure in the Cotton Club, from rival bosses to community elders, now knew the true depth of Silas, the Serpent Thorn's depravity. Bumpy Johnson, who had remained silent throughout Eve's chilling recitation, finally moved. Slowly, Deliberately, he reached into his breast pocket and withdrew an unlit cigar. He held it between his fingers, turning it, his gaze never leaving Silas. It was a gesture understood by all, not a threat of violence, but a final, irrevocable verdict. Silas was not physically harmed. There was no bloodshed, no drawn weapons. Instead, he was socially executed. His reputation, the very currency of his power, was shattered beyond repair. His power base evaporated in the silent, watchful eyes of the room. He was exiled from Harlem not by force, but by the crushing weight of unpayable debt and public shame, a shame that would follow him wherever he went. The domino effect was immediate and brutal. Within 72 hours, Silas's new crew, seeing the depth of his infamy, dispersed like smoke. His backers in Philadelphia, fearing association with such a pariah, abandoned him, severing all ties. Silas the Serpent. Thorn became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning on the streets, a ghost banished from the city he once sought to conquer. Bumpy Johnson didn't make threats, he made promises, and he understood that true power wasn't about bullets, but about understanding the intricate, unbreakable web of loyalty, debt, and reputation that bound a community. It's a stark lesson in the long game, a testament to a strategic genius often underestimated. Bumpy Johnson didn't just survive 3 wars. He orchestrated the 4th, the silent one, the one nobody saw coming. He allowed Silas to believe he was free, to grow arrogant, to dig his own grave with each escalating betrayal, all while setting the stage for the ultimate unpayable debt. Respect is not given, it is earned. And sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, but a well-placed face at table 7. If this story of calculated betrayal and ultimate justice caught your attention, then hit that like button right now. What are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel to uncover more forgotten chapters of power and consequence. Was Bumpy's method cruel or simply just? And what does true loyalty demand in a world built on shifting allegiances? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that some debts can never be repaid. And make sure you hit that notification bell, because the next tale we unravel from the shadows is even more insane than this one.